Welcome to The Bold Blueprint, a podcast for modern educators who dare to think differently. Here we explore the intersection of education and leadership, diving into bold strategies, innovative teaching, and the mindset shifts that drive real impact. Whether you're in the classroom, leading a team, or shaping the future of education, this is your space to learn, grow, and lead with confidence. Hey everybody, hello listeners, hello Barbie, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. I've got half a voice, so hopefully it comes out okay on your side, but lovely to be here.
Oh my gosh, no, you sound great. It sounds a little bit croaky. How are you feeling?
Oh, fine. I actually feel fine. I just sound different. So otherwise, amazing. It's not raining for the
It,
moment. So it's
it's
great. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I was overseas last week. I got to do a couple of cool presentations with different groups of people and talking about voice. I mean, gosh, the most embarrassing thing happened to me last week where I had a few presentations and it went quite well, but the last one, I decided to eat some chili mid-sentence, and I quite like spicy food, but in the middle of me talking, can I tell you what happened? My voice completely went away. I was like, and then I stopped and I looked at everyone. And I think as I started, I drank some water and I was able to talk. Someone said, "Oh my gosh, he's okay." But it totally went in my head. I got so overwhelmed and so nervous. But I'm back. I'm back in the normal world this week, and I am so. I love that we've got this next guest with us, Barbie. Do you want to introduce who we've got ahead of us? Who's going to give us some really good discussions?
Yes, yes. So I know sometimes in our profession, we kind of wear a lot of hats. And then hopefully, along with some of these podcast episodes, we realize we don't have to wear all of them. There's other people out there, some great people out there that can help us along our journey. So we've invited Tahnee on today. So she's the founder director of HumanX HR. And I'm reading off my notes because I always get nervous talking about people. But from my perspective, she's not your average HR consultant. Um, Down to earth, someone a guy you instantly want to grab a coffee or a wine with. She's sharp, fearless, I find, operator when it comes to workplace culture and accountability. She's known for cutting through, I guess, all the fluff that can be out there and helping businesses face the real issues. And especially in our sector, we want everyone to just get back to that real core of what we do, that quality of care to children. And then she's also passionate about making workplaces better, not just compliant. Um, yeah, and I find she works with, I could be saying this, you can correct me if you're afterwards, Tony. Works with small and medium businesses to rethink HR. So no box ticking, no lazy leadership, just clear, practical strategies that people protect people and improve culture on this side. But yeah, welcome,
Wow,
Tony.
what an introduction, Tahnee. That's so cool. I mean, Tahnee, I'd love to hear a bit more about you, but I think we'd all agree we're in the business of people. Early childhood, early learning services, and outside of school hours spaces. Our core business is people, which if we think about that, we're all emotional creatures at the end of the day. So sometimes I think our leadership teams are also not just leading people, but also managing emotions and different skill sets of where people are at. But yeah, big one. Welcome to you.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Barbie. That was an intro indeed. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you both. And you are in the business of people, Jamie, and you have people delivering acts of service for your essentially your customers and the people who you are custodians of every day. So I think HR is a really lovely intersection with the early childhood space because it is keeping that human element really centric.
So interesting. So my partner works in renewable energy, and I think what's interesting is and in renewable there's wind farms, and if the wind farm breaks down, the entire organization kind of stops, right?
Mm.
I kind of think about that in our world. And, we've spoken heavily in our previous podcasts about training and development and, people who might not make the right decisions. I truly believe that people are good people. I don't think people typically wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to do something that's not the right decision. Um, Usually scenarios occur. I'm not sure if you've got any kind of, examples or stories to kind of trigger our discussions today, but I'm sure you may have seen a couple of challenging and complex things over time. Obviously, making sure things are confidential, but
Yeah.
have you found in our space that sometimes is some complexity?
I think, Jamie, it's really common to your space, but any space where there is a level of passion and service involved in the profession. And in your case, it's that caring, wanting to nurture children and develop and help them grow. Sometimes we can use that passion and overplay it a little and forgive all manner of sins, both of the organization and the employer, but also our team and our employees, and forget that we need some frameworks and some structures within those teams so everybody's really clear on how they come to work and do their best work and how they engage with each other. Again, to your point, Jamie, those emotions can come into play because we're talking about lots and lots of micro interpersonal interactions within any given working day, and layering up all of our contexts of life and the emotions that come forward. And that's all focusing and that's all impacting our decision making. So we have a few different examples. We have a few different examples that we can speak to today that Barbie and I have come across within your sector. And I've also brought in some stories from my colleagues as well, all in the interests of helping your leaders grow and understand what kinds of conversations they can be having and what sorts of tools are out there that can help them set that environment so then people can come to work and play.
I think it can be quite a lonely role leading people. I
Mm.
think it can be quite complex, very different to other people who might have a manual and a roadmap of how to, you think about the legal profession, at least there's the law and working through that. Our people in, broad strokes typically are learning on the job when they're leading people, I think. And sometimes the complexity that comes through with that, I know in my role, in my space, you can get some center managers or approved providers going, what the heck has happened here? What do we do? Like, how do we even unpack that and ensure that also we're protecting the business and the service to, continue to provide that service in the best way possible? What are your thoughts, Barbie?
Yeah, and I know from the leadership perspective, because often we start out as an educator and work our way up, and then you're suddenly in charge of a lot of people. Say, I did teaching at uni, and there's nothing that covers working with other people, let alone managing other people. Um, to then going from just being on your own in a classroom, I guess, to then working alongside others. So you know nothing of it, and then learning along the way. But also, I think my fault when I was an early leader was just thinking I had to learn it all and know it all. I think I mentioned a little at the start. Whereas I wish I would have reached out to people like Tahnee or other people earlier
Yeah.
instead of trying to figure and sort it all myself. Like I think there's expertise in little areas for a reason, and it's just utilizing that more. But there is an expectation for people, whether it's ourselves and our employers, to expect us to know that side of HR, which is sometimes quite complex, can be situational. Um, could be things that were just a policy in a previous workplace. Someone may have worked there for a long time, so in their mind, it's actually just something that's regulated and is a norm. There's lots of little indiscrepancies I've noticed over the years. Like, I guess there's myths along there of what.
What a myth busting. That's so interesting. People do have that knowledge with themselves over time, but also the HR and employment space is evolving and changing rapidly,
Mm,
I'm interested, like, I kind of want to eat some popcorn right now and just be a bit entertained because I want to live through you right now. I don't want any stories that you're about to share come into my world. I'm sure you as Barbie, but I'm curious. I would love to hear a story maybe that can maybe go into a bit of a discussion about how we could maybe prevent some stuff.
could I set the scene for that first one, Tan? Or
Oh, you got a story.
Absolutely. Before we launch in, Barbie, I think let's start with the context that the good news is that a lot of the skills that educators have that they bring to the table as educators are incredibly transferable. And leadership can be painted as this aspirational goal that I have to reach, when really it's a journey that we are all on constantly, whether we have a title of leader or not. And educators are particularly well positioned to harness those human skills and just learn some techniques, and also gain the confidence to know when to deploy them. So I want to let's start on a really positive note there before we get into spilling the tea, as the kids would say.
No, I think that's really important because
Mm.
we are in a sector that is about making impact. And I do believe that our sector, people go into this sector wanting to make a change and a difference to lives. And most people want to show up, and relationships is at the core of everything that most people do. And being able to help serve the first, 5 to 12 years worth of a child's life, have that foundation. So I love that you said that. And I think in this podcast, this isn't about going down the deep, dark, gory, let's kind of, my words just now, eat popcorn and listen, but it is about how do we also unpack and give listeners some stories to have as a moment in time to think about, well, how do we prevent these things occurring, and how do we support and answer questions as well. So I like that you framed that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Barbie, set us up.
So Barbie, do you want to set the
Yeah.
scene?
Yeah, so this is actually all right. So I've actually asked Tahnee this in the past because it's a real story I've heard out there, and the reason I thought I'd pop it in this, although it's not our usual angle, it's just if I've heard it, I'm sure it's occurred elsewhere, and it's just people not knowing what they can or can't do because there's multiple layers to this. So I was talking to someone about a director that had a parent come to them, a father come to them to raise concerns about one of their educators being on OnlyFans.
Oh,
So the initial, I think, reaction the dad was expecting was for the educator to get in trouble or something along the lines. I have to admit myself, I was like, well, how does he know? That was where my mind went. And then there were so many, I guess, to describe it, it's like just everything crossover of kind of what boundaries are there between personal and professional life, then not considering what the platform was, whether it was OnlyFans or Kmart, like what's their rights to a second income stream, a second job. I know I've seen all different things in contracts, and I've talked to Tahnee off air before because some people just see it in their contract and think, yep, I have to do that. It's not always the way. So, what rights do educators have when it comes to those second jobs and their employers? Where do privacy and I guess ethics and HR kind of miscollide on this one? And how should services actually handle situations like this? So, I know this is a bit of a tricky one, but it was Tahnee I went to when I first heard of it, to help me unpack this one on this side. But I know it's kind of just one incident, but I guess it comes with like there's the unseen pressures and myths and realities of working in our profession in education and care today, and the gaps, I guess, between what servers think they can and can't do to what's actually fair, legal,
yes.
ethical.
There is so much to unpack here because you've got an educator who is looking to get a supplementary income, but you also have, and I guess, Tahnee, interesting to get you to unpack this as well, but as an employer, I also want my employees outside of the work hours to represent me in the very best way that's not going to tarnish my reputation, be it being on OnlyFans, or be it being absolutely wasted on the weekend with a bunch of parents, So this is an interesting kind of case study that's come up. Absolutely.
This situation, Barbie, might be a spicy version of one of the more complex scenarios that we'd see, but some of the elements aren't that uncommon. To your point, that secondary education, that right to an online presence, that interaction between parents and educators, etc. So I think the most important message here is that as a leader, don't panic when when you're faced with a scenario like this. There is an initial instinct that this is serious and I need to meet the person bringing the complaint where they're at with the same level of emotion. In reality, we just need to sit back and pause for a second and seek some advice to look at what is the right response or the fair response, when we're assessing the facts against the law. So what can we do from a fair work perspective and or other legislation like privacy? Policy, what does our organization say that we can do about these situations? And then from a fairness perspective, and that's where we can consider other things like that, like the scenario of the individual employee and the position that they're in where they're seeking a secondary income. There's some gender questions that come into play here as well. There's a privacy element, and what's appropriate conduct from the parent equally. So all of those things need to be considered, and it will depend on the specific scenario. But if we just make some sort of general assumptions about this scenario, ultimately, if that employee isn't at work, i.e., during work hours, and they're not representing or claiming to represent the employer, they're not sort of using employers' communications channels or targeting parents, etc., then it's likely that the organisation is going to be quite limited in action that they can take from a general perspective. If you then sort of look at the next layer and understand, well, do we have policies in place around secondary employment, around online presence, and accessing those kinds of frameworks like our policies? Is there any action that we can take there? But ultimately, if we come back to we're humans, let's start from a values perspective. And Jamie, I think this addresses your point around around impacting an employer's reputation, and perhaps having a discussion with that employee and the team more broadly about their extracurricular activities and what they might be doing to respect the reputation of the employer and limiting that risk to the employer's reputation as well, and having a bit of a collaborative discussion about some ideas to protect both parties.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is that there's a whole variety of things to work through. So if I am employed by a service and my hours are start and finish time, but then out of the working hours I do something that might have implications to the reputation and the successfulness of that service that I work at, could I, as an educator, be held responsible? Or does it mean that I finish my hours and all responsibilities out the door because I'm not actually physically being paid for those hours?
It's not quite that simple, Jamie. It's a great question, and again, it will come down to the nuances of the scenario of the situation. I think employees need to be really conscious about their out of hours behavior, and if there's a reasonable expectation that that's going to impact their job, their ability to do their job, their ability to um, their ability to do their job, and any risk that they might be bringing to their employer. So, for example, wearing their uniform or
Yeah.
using their uniform to create content outside of work. That would be a pretty direct link to reputational risk. Referencing their employer or referencing the names of their colleagues or children that they work with, that would be a pretty clear and direct link as well. If this is about getting drunk on the weekend and partying and having a great time, there's not much that an employer can do in that instance. Where it starts to get a little bit grayer is if those social interactions, if that employee was enticing parents or anybody who might be considered a partner or a client to engage in activities that might put the reputation of the organization at risk. That's where we're getting a little grayer as well. I think what's really important in this instance is to set very clear values. This is what's important to us. Care of our children. This is how we show up as educators, both in our professional and our personal lives. And if we can commit to that, then you're sort of moving forward with the assumption that everybody is aligned on our core values. And that's going to minimize the risk of some of these more complex situations coming to light. Open communication is also incredibly important. for an employee who wants to have some extra hobbies that might be considered a little controversial, if there's an open line of communication there and there's a level of transparency, those boundaries and that risk mitigation strategy can be set in the early days as opposed to finding out after the fact and having to deal with it. We also need to consider the individual employee in this situation. An employer has a responsibility to protect that employee during work time. So a customer or a parent in this case if they were to approach that individual employee during their work hours, depending on how they decided to have that communication, the employer may need to put some support around that employee too, both from a physical safety and security perspective, but also a mental psychological safety perspective.
I have to admit, I thought that too, like I said at the start when I heard it, like it was more like, oh, the staff member, what do we do? But I was like, hang on, what about the parent? Like, what do you do there on that side of it? It's just, yeah, like you say, so many layers. And the example earlier you gave of, or the example you said if they're wearing the uniform, I had this happen with an employee great employee,
Right.
but then their second job was a DJ at a pretty big club in Sydney, lots of everything around. But then they made their profile picture on Facebook one day, them DJing, cigarette, I think alcohol, everything, but they had the work hoodie on.
Oh no.
So in that context, I had to approach because of the hoodie, or someone else let me know about it, of like, oh yeah, we got to take that down. But it did lead to that conversation, and I'm lucky that was something small because a very great person, they didn't even think twice about it, of the two, because they're two completely different worlds for them. Great educator, just also loves that other side of late night DJ clubs. But it meant that we could then address that more before anyone else did other things and really think about their social media presence. Like, yes, we don't have a right to it, but there's like other people looking and what they can see, hence our logo on your profile picture, everyone can see. But it made them think a lot more into it and what they have public as well.
Yeah.
Made a fair few question on that side. I know this is very, very different on that, but there's just so many different complex levels. I've heard of people having employers like tell them they have to have certain stuff on their Facebook, like even their personal Facebook, not a work Facebook, like just all different areas they kind of overstep on that side. But I'm probably deviating from there. I've just
No, I
realized.
think that's a
No,
really good point.
that's a good point. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, Barbie, because equally, your personal online presence, unless it's a requirement of your role and therefore you've agreed to an employment contract based on that, that's yours to own. And so, employers who want their employees to create an online presence and build brand or to educate or for whatever reason, they need to be considerate of not only who owns that profile, because if that employee was to leave, where does that content then go and who owns how that's used post employment? But also, implement requirements of the employee to post on social media? And if it's a personal profile versus a work related profile, how is that person either compensated for that brand and that brand building, or does the organization own the profile and they're simply an administrator or custodian of it?
So, Tani, I've got a question for you. And I know that this can happen quite often. Our workforce sometimes can be between the age of, 16, 17, 18, 24-year-olds. Of course, social media is definitely in the fabric of generations. And sometimes people have not a great day and they want to express their not so great day and where they work online. And then all of a sudden, their teammates who thought they were friends then screenshots what they may have posted about a service that they work at in a negative light. What advice could you have around that?
This one can be a little clearer, Jamie. Oftentimes, contracts will reference that an employee is agreeing to not put the organization's reputation at risk. And so, if they've called out their employer directly, or if they've made it clear on their profile who their employer is and made comments that bring that organization into disrepute, there can be some consequences to that would follow standard disciplinary procedures. Where it becomes a little murky, though, is the evidence to that. So if your employee is agreeing, yes, I did that, then it's a fairly straightforward process to understand how do I informally or formally walk through a disciplinary process there. It simply might start with a conversation around, how do you think that makes us look? This is your workplace too. Where it gets a little murky is if they deny that and it brings the evidence into question. And I've seen employers lose a lot of time and damage a lot of relationships trying to arbitrate very minute points around the evidence, when in reality, resetting that expectation to move forward can often be the only conversation that's needed. And a similar interesting situation that I think would be relevant to your space too is where employees get caught taking sick leave or personal leave.
Oh yes, and then
And
they post the photo at the beach with a cocktail.
that's right. I mean, it brings a level of common sense. We're questioning the common sense there as well. But that is a reasonably common situation where you become connected to people on social media because you like working with your colleagues, and then inevitably somebody who suffered the burden of you not being at work that day raises it with an employer. Now, employers and leaders can often get very righteous in these situations, and that feeling of that's unfair, that's unjust, they're at the beach and I'm here at work picking up the slack. That can lead to, again, some really messy conversations. Reality is, employees need to follow the organization's policies around how personal leave is taken. So if they have notified and they've only taken one day, then again, there's not much that an employer can do other than have a conversation with them. In fact, employers and leaders can put themselves at risk if they're challenging that personal leave and they're found out to be wrong, that that employee was sick. Disciplining an employee for taking personal leave is never a good idea, and in fact can be a breach of fair work. So we need to tread really carefully here. If you have a policy in place that requires a medical certificate after a couple of consecutive days leave, then um, you can definitely set that expectation. But this is one of those scenarios that you need to weigh up the benefits.
So I've got a question: medical certificates. Quite often, medical certificates can come back, and let's just say the employee has done the correct job. They've followed the procedure. It's all great, all good. We're happy with that. But then the medical certificate comes back and says not able to work due to medical conditions, and the employee then thinking, well, what is the thing that's implicating you from the workspace? What could you say to leaders around advising them about what they can and cannot find out to try and work out what the medical condition might be that limits the capacity of work?
This is a really interesting area because you're in a space where your workers actually have physical requirements to their roles oftentimes. Now, it's a fine line to tread. I would always suggest that there is some organizational policy, so a safety policy, a fit for work policy, and a framework for how we're going to have these conversations. So everybody's really clear that this is what will happen. And your leaders have a structure that they can come back to, and not a script, but a process that they can follow. So they don't put themselves and the organization in a position of risk by asking inappropriate questions or moving too fast on that. So where we start is, are you fit to perform the duties of your role? And so it's really important that there is some sort of a position description or role clarity statement. So it's very clear what the requirements of the role are. If you have reasonable concerns, so if somebody has made it clear, I've been off work because I've had a cold, and you just want to make their life difficult, then that's not appropriate and a very risky move to ask them for more evidence, I suppose, of that. It's not putting them at risk of performing their role, provided that they're following protocols around safety, of course. Where it becomes a little unclear is if you have concerns. So you might observe them physically to be, they might be struggling to bend or lift or perform some of those tasks. And in that scenario, you can step into that and say, I've observed this. You've been off sick with your medical certificate. I'd really like you to go and get a fit for work. And so they ideally would take their position description to their treating doctor and or physio and get cleared to return to work to perform those duties. Now, ideally, you would allow them work time to go and do that because it's a request that you've made. And ideally, you would have that in policy so that they know that you are able to request that. They might try to refuse that action, and then you're in a position where you need to formally consult with them to move down that path. Um, where it becomes even less clear, and I know I'm just throwing more problems at you and your leaders, but where it becomes even less clear is when you've got mental health concerns or mental
Yeah.
fitness questions, because again, this can impact the ability for them to perform their duties and interact with children in an appropriate way. It's the same approach with a little more sensitivity and probably a bit more of a formal structure around that. So they've got the opportunity to bring a support person to the table if they would like that support, getting it documented in writing that you are trying to have a supportive conversation with them and making it very clear that this is not a disciplinary procedure.
Yeah, and I know I've seen cases too of mental health. There's no issues with the mental health condition. It might be just the employer might know they're on medications and they've stopped taking it for the mental health conditions. And then I've seen employers just unsure, especially because looking after children, what they can or can't do, especially because then that medical knowledge is so limited. You might only know what you know because they've disclosed it. You
Mm,
might know 5% or 100%. You don't know. There's so many, like you said, different areas on that, and it will be all individual to what each thing is occurring, and maybe even what our position is, like whether it is working directly with children might play another level, or is it just straight across the board,
yes.
I guess, on what you can and can't do in that area? Because I guess that's performing your job. You need to know they can be responsible, supervise, um, which is always very, very hard on this type of area. I think what we can tell with all of this, how hard it is why speaking to someone else and not having to know it all is like something. And I wrote something you wrote early on. I number point mine, so this is back at 6. But you said something, Tani. Don't panic, pause,
Mm,
and don't meet their emotions, what it is. And it's something like I know for me as a leader, I was bad at doing. I like to try and fix the problem, make everything better straight away. Really bad at the pausing and don't meet the emotion side. But I think with all of this, it's a bit of that and not having to solve it right there in that second. Um, Especially on a HR lens. Obviously, if it was a child injury, it's a bit different. But this type of situations, it's like we think we need to have all those answers right then and there, but we don't, and then just work on solving that or working towards it, or even another one, my number 7, I wrote of what you said, Tani, is reset expectations. Um, and then I wrote to not go over the issues. I kind of wrote here, you didn't say, but I wrote like a resentment. It sounded like if it's something that's happened, that social media post type thing, I think it was, to like just work off that kind of resentment and reset that expectations, because that might keep making you flounder in that area, I guess, instead of moving forward as an employer. So that's how I took it of myself as a leader. But
absolutely. And you're spending really valuable energy and time on
mm,
things that you can't change versus re-establishing relationships and values alignment that will set boundaries for behavior moving forward.
So, Tani, this is all interesting around the things because I guess sometimes in leadership we do need to be reactive to stuff that occurs, right? I mean, what do you think would be the best advice? Because you talked about values reset, but I guess my mind goes back to the start of employment
Mm,
when we're bringing people into our organization. Like, I think there's been a big emphasis and importance of that from the department. I know in my space, the department quite often when they're doing their spot checks are asking about inductions. It's the first thing they ask about, and it goes back to my own personal perspective around RTOs and trainings and all that stuff before people even start. That people have a qualification, but what have they truly learnt,
Yes.
and what knowledge have they brought into that organisation? Like, what do you see as some advice for some of the listeners out there around when people start the journey of employment? What should occur?
You nailed it, Jamie. That induction, do you know what? Let's take one step back to the recruitment piece.
Yeah,
And either if you're using a great recruitment partner, like Barbie
Segue.
and her team, or if you're doing it yourself, making sure that you are very clear that it's your responsibility to paint the picture of what this job is and what this organization looks like from a values and culture perspective,
yeah,
because then you can
Mm.
establish or then you can establish that next step of conversation in terms of how do we fit and how do we make each other better. If you haven't
yeah.
got that clear, then it's just a warm body in a seat. And Barbie, would you agree?
Yeah, because we even get clients that are too nice, great clients, and they won't ask for things, but when I go to recruit for the role, I will add them because I know what type of person that role might attract. Like someone looking to try and probably work from home and not be as present, especially when there's so much autonomy to it. I just add in extra things myself. We do it with child safeguarding too, but I guess if we think of it a lot more in the HR lens, and I find it helps wean out those people that I've come across that are looking for certain things to, and then the same with safeguarding, you emphasize certain aspects because they're looking for places that don't overly say they do the working with children check or criminal history check. It's the same with just recruiting in general. Um, and again, I wrote what you said, Tony. It's your responsibility to paint the picture. So I try and set that type of scene for them before they even apply or get in
Yes,
the doors through
yes,
us to them.
Yeah.
And it's
exactly.
being really mindful of that on that side. I've never thought of it that way until you said it before, though, on helping on that side. But I need to use that a bit more.
Yeah, that's the first step, and then that onboarding um, period is so important and so valuable. And you think about how many services would say two buddy shifts, and then you're ready.
Mm.
Then you know
If,
everything you need to know
if you're lucky, Tani
if
and
you're
Bob,
lucky.
I know services that they get a 30-minute interview and they start the next day. And for us in our organisation, we've done an extensive amount of work. That induction should be an ongoing process.
Yes,
Mm.
That first day or two not being with children and actually spending time, having access to resources, having a buddy system. But also, in my mind, some of our services across the country, not typically ours, but as a broad stroke, getting some staff can be quite challenging. So
absolutely.
there are some services out there that are struggling to meet ratio, and just getting someone in the service helps to equip to take on as many children in that service. But my approach is, well, if you've been waiting X amount of time for a person anyway, what's another couple of days? Like, let's actually spend that time, because it's going to pay dividends in the long run if you invest in those early days.
Investment's the right word, Jamie, and there's honestly no excuse anymore because micro learning is super accessible. And if it's something that you're not comfortable with or you don't know how to do, as Barbie said before, go and get some support to help with that, because it no longer means I'm not saying that you need to have a new starter off the floor for 2 weeks. That's absolutely not the case. It's a commercial need at the end of the day, and so micro learning can be very useful. And other creative ways of induction, for example, you can gamify it, make a scavenger hunt that is essentially an onboarding checklist that puts the responsibility back in the hands of the new starter. Um,
Gamifying inductions.
Yeah, yeah, it's right in
yeah,
it.
Sorry,
absolutely.
great concepts. Have some
It's
fun with it.
Have
Yeah.
some fun with it because this is a fun environment. You want your educators to, it's their job to bring some fun to work. Yeah,
Mm.
and so why should we as their
Gamifying.
employers and their leaders just crush their souls? Come into work, read through 300 pages of policies. We've crushed your soul. Now go and be fun. It's our job to also make their experience fun. But equally, people talk about unicorns, and Barbie, I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times. I need a unicorn for this role. Reality is unicorns don't exist. And, don't tell the kids that, but unicorns don't exist. And the sooner we get comfortable with this concept that it is our responsibility to build great people and build great leaders, just like it's our responsibility to create these environments for children, the sooner we're going to invest in resources and programs that will take somebody who might have 60% of what we're looking for or have some transferable
Mm.
skills and invest in them as humans and equip them with the skills and experience that they need to do the job. Yeah, it's going to take some investment upfront in system or program or gamifying onboarding, but that then becomes repeatable and becomes culturally embedded in this is how we do things here. So then your pool of talent just opened up because no longer do you look for unicorns.
Okay, so no unicorns. Well, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a unicorn,
Of
and I
course.
say that you say that because I'm
Oh,
a redhead with blue eyes, and it actually
Oh.
genetically, I'm apparently am a unicorn, but I don't think I'm a magical beast with a horn hanging out of my head. But I agree. I think professional development and ongoing talent pools and increasement of people's performance about capacity building happens over time. I
mm,
think to myself, I don't know. I did share the story last in one of our podcasts around driving, and I do think when people start, it is about that concept of driving, where when you get your L's and you start driving for the first time, no matter what age group you were when you did it. I mean, I was 32, but
impressive.
you didn't just get the keys right at the beginning and say, "Good luck, off you go on the highway and the M1 or M2 or whatever motorway you go on." What happens? You're actually going to do a test. You're going to have someone who's next to you in the car. You're going to log your hours for X amount of time.
Hmm.
You're then going to get your P's, and then you might get your green P's depending on what other state, and then you get your license. It actually takes years to get your full license to drive independently. And I think it's same around hiring, inducting, and training people, that it is a privilege to be able to spend time and investing. And some of the stories that we've spoken about around the OnlyFans case, and sick leave and policies and values, and understanding that is, I guess, I hope we all agree, and I'm feeling like we might, that what's most important about trying to prevent as much issues occurring down the track is what we do in those early days of employment.
Absolutely, Jamie, and making sure that it's not set and forget,
Yeah.
because this is a workplace is an ongoing evolution. There are humans involved, and humans make up that culture. And the driving metaphor is wonderful because you start and you're very consciously incompetent at driving, and now you'd be at a point where you think, I can't remember how I got to work this morning. So now you're very unconsciously competent.
Yeah.
And so when we're moving through the motions, sometimes we can forget that we need to stop and pause and be really thoughtful about how we're operating our workplace and how we're setting that culture with
Well,
that.
there's a leadership model that I quite often do training on, and it's called the situational leadership model.
Sure.
I don't know if you've heard of it, but situational leadership modeling is around, as a leader, based on that situation, how do you support that person rather than being a dictator?
Mm,
And the early starters of, and it's all from this belief that every person is a good person, and
mm,
people are either competent, confident, or non-confident, or non-competent around tasks. And we need to be able to accommodate ourselves that maybe some people might need a checklist of how to guide and close support, compared to people who master skills, who the mastery of skills should become the mentor and coach and buddies. But for all the listeners out there, Google, if you can, one little hot tip, situational leadership model, and there's some great YouTube videos out there, and it's a very practical tool that anyone can really pick up immediately. That's interesting. Oh, this is a great conversation, Barbie and
I
Tahnee.
know. I
Yeah.
always have questions for Tahnee. Yeah.
Yeah, back at you. Pleasure.
So
Oh,
what advice do you have for any listeners listening today, be an educator or leader, what advice might you have for someone to have as a takeaway?
My best advice is to think about your workplace as a house. And have I got really great foundations? My foundations are my policies, my employment contracts. And then have I got really great structures? So, do we have the right communication channels? Do we have really clear expectations, e.g., position descriptions and goals for our team? And then you can think about, now, how do I dress the house? What color paint am I using? What sort of decor? Because all of the decor things, so things like, do we provide fruit for lunch, and what are we doing? Do we have nice uniforms? And all of those things that dress the house, they're all sugar hits. They're important in the moment, but if you've got nothing to hang them on or no foundations to sit them on, then it's not going to be valuable.
Yeah, right.
I love that. I wrote all that down, like, and you can just picture that as you go. And I think everyone, like the sugar rush or the dopamine hit, kind of goes and does three. Like, I think I've seen a lot of people really think on those uniforms or the fruit bowl or what chocolate they're providing, pending your team, but may have not done position descriptions. I've seen them not touched in 15 years. I
Yeah,
Yeah.
feel like I've seen one for 20 years not touched.
yeah,
And even policies not on, I've no services don't have a policy on social media. It's been around for a long time now. Like, there's just
yeah.
so many different things, but they've got great uniforms. Like, it's just, I don't know. Yeah, really, really good way to look at it.
So maybe it's about, for all of our listeners, start thinking about, does our house need a bit of a lick of paint, and maybe recalibrating, and thinking about what is our induction checklist look like? How can we make it a bit of a gamified experience? How do we really look inwardly around these moments, and even thinking about, have we had a lot of turnover in our services? Have we
Mm.
had significant issues that are occurring, and how are we making sure that we're crafting time in our already busy schedule to think about, is there a different way that we could be looking at this, and making a collective decision around that? My house in my mind was very colorful as you're talking about
I pictured one too.
that.
Yeah, I love that. And that's the fun stuff, that you've got to earn it though. You have to earn the privilege to be spending time there.
So if I was to like change policies and procedures and checklists, and maybe I'm introducing a social media policy, for example, like how do I get people to understand that there's been a change, and how do I know that they've understood that?
Great question, Jamie. You've got some obligations, first of all, because it's highly likely that your team will be covered by a modern award. So there may be a requirement to consult with them on any workplace changes. So if you're introducing a new policy, depending on how that policy is introduced and the content, the nature of it, you may be required to present that information to the team and get their feedback before you write it into policy. Um, the language is incredibly important. Your team don't want to read 30-page legalese
Yeah.
documents. Simple, clear, to the point, to make sure that everybody understands their obligations and any actions or consequences that might come of that. And making sure that, again, it doesn't just go on a shelf, that it's revisited on a regular basis so that it stays relevant. We read a policy the other day from a service that still talked about faxing. informations and faxing medical certificates. And you would have educators who are like, I've never used a fax. What is this?
Yeah.
There'd be what's a fax, so that
What's a fax? Or policies that say you can't text message if you're calling in sick. That's, I mean, that's just creating difficulty for everybody involved. So yeah, revisiting to make sure that they stay
Yeah.
relevant and communicating them in a way that is simple, plain English.
Yeah. Okay, that's fascinating. So it's really about how you introduce any kind of change, how you language it and make it really people can actually understand it. But that consultation of putting it out there and getting feedback.
And the why, Jamie, I think this is missed sometimes too, because the director or the board might have had lots of conversations about why this social media policy is important. And then suddenly it pops up in front of the team and they're all wondering, well, why are we doing this? Who did something bad? And in reality, if you take them on the journey of this was highlighted, or you use your podcast and say, I heard this on the podcast, and I think this is a great idea for us to look at. Taking them on the journey as to why you're introducing a policy is much more likely to get that team's buy-in from the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
awesome.
really good idea, especially with listening to this podcast. But in general, because you don't want to breach any privacy or make it sound like you're targeting anyone, like passive aggressive is like, oh, we're doing this because, and everyone knows, but you don't.
We're
It's like
doing
the
this
elephant in the room.
because of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 basically, and that's what I think happens out there. Oh, I feel like I can keep talking to Tahnee forever and yourself, Jamie, but I know actually, I was gonna try and ask a wrap-up question, which I'm always really, really, really bad at asking, but I should see if anyone else would like to add anything before I do.
No, this has been a great conversation. We've really unpacked in this Barbie around the hiring, the induction, the
Mm,
ongoing conversations that it's everyone's responsibility. And I think the biggest thing that I can hear out of this session, if I was to have one takeaway, it would be if anything complex comes to us, just slow down
mm,
and go through the motions and probably seek advice.
yeah. No, definitely. Like I said, I wish I did earlier. So, we have a question we ask that has nothing to do with what we record on purpose, and I don't know when to put in the context, but I asked this to our last guest. So the question is, what's the first live, whether it's live music or live performance or live show you can remember seeing? And if you need time to think, I can give a caveat to the last guest we asked. She then had to catch a flight. She had to leave this and catch a flight and got upgraded to business class and was sitting next to Jimmy Barnes. Like of all the time, like, and we were even, I
No.
think, we were talking about manifesting or something, or like just
Yeah.
thinking positive. And I can't believe that happened straight after this. So sorry to leave you still thinking of yours.
No,
But
that's amazing. I actually have a strange linked story there. I've never seen Jimmy Barnes ever, and it's very un-Australian of me. So of course I did the most Australian thing and went to see Cold Chisel in Queenstown earlier
Wow.
this year. And so we were only there to see Jimmy Barnes, and we bumped into Jimmy Barnes and his wife Jane at the airport at the baggage carousel. And I've never done this in my entire life, but I went up to him and chatted and asked him if we could take a photo, and he was the sweetest human. And then he just crushed it the next day at the gig. Okay, the first gig that I'm willing to admit to seeing live was
No,
some,
no.
no,
Before that,
I'll tell
the
you
one that you
both.
don't
I'll tell
want
you both. It was
to.
something for Kate at the Uni Bar on the Hill in Newcastle. It I don't know, 99 maybe. And I'm still a fan. I would have seen them, I don't know, 20 times at this point. But my first live performance was probably when I was 4 or 5 and went to Romper Room. And I don't know if you
Absolutely.
remember. Okay, yeah. So Big Dog and Miss Kim, that would be the first live performance.
see, I have no idea. I'm like,
And there have been many since then.
Yeah. So romper room and something for Kate. I have seen something for Kate quite a
I
few
do.
times myself. What a great live band.
Still great.
Yeah, still great. That's true.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking all our guests now. Maybe we just need it's like something to do with Jimmy Barnes.
What's a
What's the
Jimmy
next?
Barnes?
That's weird. um, it's either something that's already happened around an airport or a plane or about to happen. Like everyone just maybe your next flight, Jamie, because I don't catch any. You'll be there for some reason.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your time, Tony. We really appreciate us spending this really important conversation about supporting people in the workplace.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Barbie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Bold Blueprint.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out to us on
elm.net.au or
fireflyhr.com.au.
Bye.
Bye.